I sat at that glossy linen-draped table, my jaw-tight fingers white around the stem of a half-drunk wineglass. The chandeliers above glistened like icicles, cold and elegant, much like the people who filled the room. Charles Langston stood at the mic, tuxedo, perfect, his voice echoing through the private banquet room as he started his toast. "Let's give it up for our beautiful daughter Samantha and her fiancé Marcus, who we're still getting to know, of course." Laughter rippled around the room. My sister Elaine shot me a glance from across the table. I gave her the smallest shake of my head. "Let it go," Charles continued. "Samantha. She's always been brilliant, determined, full of grace. And now she's chosen a man who, well, let's just say, keeps her grounded." Another round of polite chuckles. He smirked, sipping his scotch like he'd just delivered a clever punchline. I stared at the candle centerpiece, willing myself not to react. My fiancée, Samantha, was seated beside me, her hand resting on my forearm. Like that made it all okay. She leaned in, whispering, "Don't take it personally. It's just his humor." I didn't respond. That wasn't humor. That was arrogance wearing a tuxedo. Then Beatrice Langston took the mic. With that signature false warmth and rehearsed charm, she began. When Samantha was a little girl, she dreamed of a perfect wedding, a grand affair. And while this may not be exactly what we envisioned years ago, she paused, looking directly at me. "Love has a funny way of surprising you." More chuckles. Even Samantha smiled, eyes down. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. But it wasn't until they brought up my mother that the floor truly dropped. Charles returned to the mic with a final flourish. "Before we wrap up, I think we should acknowledge someone who couldn't be with us tonight. Evelyn, Marcus's mother. A true character, wasn't she? Always had an opinion. Always in the middle of things." He laughed. Beatrice joined in from her seat. "Oh, yes, Evelyn certainly had a strong presence. She just had to be involved, bless her heart. Even when we didn't ask." She laughed louder, as if that made the words sweeter. I stopped breathing. They were talking about Evelyn, my mother. The woman who'd co-signed the Langstons' restaurant loan when no one else would touch them. The woman who paid out of her own pocket to repair their industrial oven during a peak season. The woman who used her savings, meant for her cancer treatments, to keep their kitchen open. And now they laughed. Samantha didn't say a word. She chuckled softly, like they were simply recounting an old memory, not desecrating the legacy of the woman who raised me. I felt something crack inside. A quiet snap. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. I leaned back in my chair, hands on my lap to hide the trembling. My heart pounded against my ribs, my mind screaming for justice, for decency. But my voice stayed locked in my throat. The room continued buzzing with conversation, clinks of glasses, polite applause. As Beatrice handed the mic to the band singer, Samantha turned to me, smiling softly. "Ready to dance?" she asked. I looked at her. This woman I'd spent years building a future with, and I didn't see a partner anymore. I saw a stranger who sat by while her parents dismantled the memory of the only woman who ever truly loved me. "No," I said quietly. "I think I need some air." I stood up and walked toward the back doors of the banquet hall. Nobody followed. Nobody noticed. The evening pressed on, the music played, but something inside me had already left. What they did wasn't just rude, it was cruel. And Samantha's silence spoke louder than any toast. I stepped into the cold night air, looked up at the dark sky, and knew one thing for certain. This wedding wouldn't happen. Not like this. Not ever. The music was too cheery, the laughter too hollow. I stood in the hallway, just outside the banquet room, watching through the narrow window of the closed door. My fists were clenched so tightly, my fingernails had left half-moon dents in my palms. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until my chest burned. I wasn't ready to go back in. Not because I was scared of confrontation, but because I knew what would happen once I opened that door. My voice wouldn't be calm. My hands wouldn't be still. And the man they thought they could mock quietly would suddenly become impossible to ignore. But I couldn't stay out here forever. Evelyn deserved more than my silence. I exhaled hard, squared my shoulders, and walked back in. The room was still buzzing, clinking glasses, soft jazz from the live band, people mid-conversation. But a few heads turned when they saw me. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't laughing. I moved with purpose. I returned to the table. Samantha looked up, eyes flashing with concern. "Marcus, are you okay?" she whispered, voice barely above the music. I stared at her, wondering how someone could look so composed after sitting through that speech. "No," I said. "I'm not." Before she could respond, I stepped away from our table and moved toward the stage where Charles and Beatrice were standing, with the band still soaking up attention from their hilarious toasts. I didn't ask for the microphone. I took it. "Excuse me," I said into the mic, my voice low but steady. The band stopped. Conversation paused. Chairs squeaked as people turned their heads. "I'd like to say something." Samantha stood, halfway up, eyes wide. "Marcus, don't," she whispered. But I was already past the point of restraint. "You made a joke about my mother tonight," I began, eyes locked on Charles and Beatrice. "Several, actually." They froze, unsure of where this was going, though the smugness hadn't quite left their faces. "Evelyn, my mother wasn't just some meddlesome old woman with strong opinions. She was a woman who saved your business when you were 2 months from bankruptcy. A woman who used her own money she needed for cancer treatment, to buy you a new oven so your kitchen wouldn't close during the holidays." A few people in the audience gasped quietly. Samantha sank back into her chair. She didn't brag. She didn't ask for credit. She just did it, quietly, because she believed in people who didn't deserve her. Beatrice's smile faltered. Charles took a step back. "You know what else she did," I continued. My voice was rising now, shaking. "She paid off the last of your son's tuition so he could graduate on time. She helped you reorganize your books when the IRS came knocking. She watched your grandkids so your son could take night classes." I paused to catch my breath, but it came out ragged, like I'd been sprinting. "And what did she get in return? Tonight she got turned into a punchline, a joke, a footnote in your self-congratulatory speeches." The room had gone stone silent. Charles cleared his throat. "Marcus, we were just reminiscing. Everyone knows Evelyn had a presence." I turned on him. "A presence. She had grace. She had dignity. She gave and never once asked for anything back. And all you had to do was show a little respect. Just once. Tonight was your chance." Samantha stood now. "Marcus, please, not here." "No," I snapped, eyes blazing. "If not here, then where? If not now, then when?" "You sat there, Sam. You laughed with them." Her lips parted, stunned. I didn't know what to say. "You say something when the people you love are being torn apart in front of you," I said, voice cracking. "You stand up. You don't let them desecrate someone's memory just to draw a few laughs at a dinner party." My eyes were wet now. I didn't care. I felt my mother's strength in my chest, felt her voice guiding mine. She never made people feel small, never threw someone's pain into a joke for attention. And yet here I am, listening to two people mock her at a party thrown in her son's honor. I lowered the mic to my side. The room stayed quiet. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. I looked around at the guests, locking eyes with a few strangers who'd been chuckling minutes earlier. None of them were smiling now. Then I looked back at Samantha. "I don't know what I'm more hurt by," I said. "That they did it, or that you let them." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move. Didn't deny it. Didn't defend it. I placed the mic gently on the stage, turned and walked away again. But this time, I didn't go out for air. This time, I was done pretending. I had nearly reached the far end of the banquet hall when Charles' voice, loud and smug, again called after me. "Marcus," he said, lifting his glass, "if you can't handle a little joke, maybe you're not cut out for marriage." The words hit like a slap. I turned around slowly, heart pounding with a heat that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with fury. The whole room watched me, heads swiveling like they'd just tuned into a live soap opera. But I didn't care about any of them. I only cared about the truth, and that it was finally time for them to hear it raw, unfiltered. I walked back toward the center of the room, my voice louder than before, slicing through the silence. "You think this is about a joke, Charles?" He raised an eyebrow. "That's all it was. You're being sensitive." "No," I said. "What you did wasn't a joke. It was a calculated insult. Dressed in silk and served on a platter, sure, but no less cruel. And if being sensitive means defending the memory of a woman who gave more to this family than either of you ever did, then yeah, I'll wear that." Beatrice looked away, her mouth a tight, thin line. Samantha stood off to the side, helpless, her hands wringing together. But still, she said nothing. I stepped closer to the head table, where Charles and Beatrice stood, like royalty presiding over their domain. "You don't get to rewrite who my mother was, just because she made you uncomfortable. You don't get to mock her for being generous when that same generosity is the reason your little empire didn't collapse 10 years ago." Charles scoffed. "We never asked for her help." "No," I shot back. "But you took it. You took every cent, every favor, every bit of energy she gave, and you treated it like an inconvenience. You think because she didn't demand gratitude, you're off the hook." My voice cracked again, but I didn't let it stop me. "You sit here in your $1,000 suits pouring vintage scotch, and you think you're better than people like me, like her. But without her, you wouldn't have anything. Not this dinner, not that restaurant, not even the ability to stand here and pretend you've always had it figured out." I glanced at the faces around the room. Some were stunned. A few nodded subtly. But most just looked away ashamed. Elaine stood slowly from her seat near the back of the room. She didn't say a word, just moved to stand beside me, arms crossed, chin high. My father followed. He stepped out from the shadows of the far table, his aging hands clenched, jaw set. "Your mother gave them everything," he said softly, "and they spit on her grave tonight." He placed a hand on my shoulder, firm and steady. "You're not alone, son." The air shifted. Charles looked from me to Elaine to my father, and for the first time that night his confidence faltered. "So what now?" he said, trying to sound amused. "You walk out because we hurt your feelings." I took one step closer to him. "I am walking out because your actions, your words proved something I didn't want to believe. That no matter what I do, no matter how hard I try to be part of this family, I'll never be more than the poor boy who got lucky." "You're twisting our words," Beatrice said, arms crossed. "This was meant to be lighthearted." "Then maybe your definition of love is broken," I replied. "Because in my world, love means standing up for the people who raised you. Love means defending their name when others try to drag it through the mud." Samantha took a step forward, then, voice small. "Marcus, please. Let's just go outside, talk this through." I turned to her, emotions swelling in my chest. If you had stood up just once, if you had said enough or "that's not fair," or even just held my hand, maybe we wouldn't be here. Her lip quivered. "I didn't know what to do." "You knew," I said, eyes meeting hers. "You just chose silence." My father stepped beside me. "Let's go, Marcus. Let's not waste another word on this." Elaine nodded. Evelyn wouldn't want us standing here begging for scraps of respect. And just like that, the choice was made. We turned and began walking out together, a quiet trio of defiance moving through a crowd that no longer dared to laugh. Behind us, the Langstons stood frozen in their designer shoes, watching their control slip through their perfectly manicured fingers. For the first time in that room, the power didn't belong to them. It belonged to Evelyn. It belonged to us. The air outside hit like a slap, cold, fresh, and real. I didn't realize how suffocating the banquet hall had been until I stepped into the parking lot. My chest heaved as if I'd surfaced from underwater. Behind me, the heavy double doors clicked shut. No music followed us, no laughter, just silence and the crunch of gravel under my father's shoes. He came up beside me slower than he used to be, his shoulders hunched more than I remembered. The years had crept up on him since Mom passed, but tonight, in this moment, he stood straighter than ever. "She'd be proud of you," he said quietly. I swallowed hard. Those 5 words cracked something open in me that no insult from the Langstons ever could. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. My hands trembled not from fury now, but from release. For months, maybe even years, I'd been bottling up everything for the sake of peace. For the wedding. For Samantha. But peace, built on silence, is a lie, and I'd finally shattered it. "She deserved better," I muttered, my eyes stinging. Better than being turned into some punchline. Elaine came up beside us, arms still crossed over her chest, her eyes scanning the dark sky. "You gave her that, Marcus. Tonight you gave her the truth, out loud, in front of everyone." A tear slipped down my cheek, uninvited, but not unwelcome. I wiped it quickly. I kept thinking, how could Sam sit through that? How could she not say anything? My father sighed. "Some people think keeping quiet is the same as keeping peace. But your mother taught us different." I nodded, remembering Evelyn's voice. Firm, when she needed to be, but never cruel. She didn't raise me to ignore injustice. She raised me to confront it with grace, with courage, and when necessary, with fire. I looked back at the restaurant's glowing windows. I could see silhouettes moving inside, guests sitting awkwardly, some pretending nothing happened, others whispering, no doubt dissecting every word I'd said. "I need to go back in," I said suddenly. Elaine blinked. "What, Marcus? Why not to argue? Not to fight," I said, "but to finish it. To say what needs to be said so there's no confusion about where I stand, or where this wedding stands." My father studied me, then nodded. "If that's what you need, son, we're behind you." "No," I said firmly. "This part, I have to do alone." Elaine looked like she wanted to protest, but stopped herself. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. "Make it count," she whispered. I nodded. And then I turned and walked back toward the restaurant. Every step felt heavier. Like I was wading through the past 6 years, every moment. I'd bitten my tongue, every insult I'd let slide, every time Samantha had laughed nervously instead of defending me. The lobby was quiet. A lone hostess blinked at me as I passed her without a word. The banquet doors were still shut, but the murmur of voices drifted through them, now louder than before. Maybe the room was recovering. Maybe the Langstons were already spinning the story to save face. Didn't matter. I wasn't going to let them write the ending. I pushed the doors open. The chatter died instantly. I stepped back into the room like a man walking into a storm he no longer feared. Eyes turned. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Charles stood near this podium, speaking with a couple of guests, but he paused when he saw me. Samantha sat at our table, her hands clutched together, eyes red-rimmed and swollen. I didn't go to her. I walked to the front of the room. "May I have a moment?" I said loud enough to cut through the awkward buzz. Silence again. No one stopped me this time. No one tried. I stood where Charles had delivered his speech earlier, at the very spot where they'd mocked Evelyn. My voice came out calm, steady, in a way it hadn't been before. "I know I already said my piece," I began. "But I need to make something clear." I glanced around the room. Some guests looked away. Others leaned in. "This wedding is over. There won't be another rehearsal or a ceremony or a first dance. What happened here tonight wasn't just an accident. It was a mirror. It showed me who I was marrying into and who I was marrying." I turned toward Samantha. "You didn't stand up for me, or for her, and I get it. Maybe you thought it would pass, that it wasn't a big deal. But my mother was everything to me. And anyone who can sit through her memory being tarnished isn't someone I can build a future with." Samantha's face collapsed into her hands, muffling a sob. I turned back to the room. My mother raised me to be strong, to speak up, to know my worth. Tonight, I honored her. I just wish it hadn't taken this long. Then, without waiting for applause or argument, I walked out once more. But this time, I wasn't leaving in anger. I was leaving in clarity. The sound of dessert spoons clinking against porcelain filled the room when I opened the doors again. Light laughter hovered uncertainly over slices of tiramisu and tiny coffee cups. A string quartet had started up in the corner, trying to smooth the jagged edge of the evening. But when I stepped through the threshold, the air shifted. Conversation died in pockets then, altogether. The quartet faltered and stopped, their bows freezing mid-stroke. Every eye turned to me. I walked straight to the front, same path I'd taken not long ago. But this time, my steps didn't shake. My voice was ready. "Sorry to interrupt your creme brulee," I said, my tone even loud enough to silence the last murmurs. Charles rose, slightly halfway out of his seat, like he wanted to stop me. Samantha turned in her chair, her eyes wide, tearful, pleading. But I didn't pause. "I've thought a lot about how tonight was supposed to go," I said. There was supposed to be laughter, love celebration, a gathering of two families coming together. Instead, it became something else entirely. I looked out over the crowd, my voice steady but iron hard. What happened tonight wasn't just about a few tasteless jokes. It wasn't just an awkward speech or poor timing. It was a reveal, a spotlight cast on who some people really are. My eyes landed on Charles and Beatrice. They sat stiffly now, expressions unreadable, the smugness drained from their faces. "You mocked my mother," I continued, "the woman who gave everything she had to people who never said thank you. You turned her legacy into a punchline. And then, when called on it, you shrugged, laughed, minimized her memory like it meant nothing." A few people shifted in their seats. Some looked down at their plates. Others leaned in, drawn like moths to the fire I was letting burn. "I can't marry into that," I said clearly. "I won't." Gasps fluttered around the room like a flock of startled birds. Samantha stood now, her voice cracking. "Marcus, don't do this. Not like this." I looked at her, heart clenched, but resolved. "You could have stopped it. You could have said, 'That's enough.' You could have stood beside me. But you didn't. You laughed." Her hands trembled, mascara streaking beneath her eyes. I didn't know what to do. I didn't mean I believe that, I said gently, but it doesn't change what happened. Or what it revealed. I turned to the crowd. I'm not walking into a marriage where I have to apologize for having pride in where I came from, where silence is expected in exchange for approval, where love is conditional and cruelty gets a laugh. Charles opened his mouth. I beat him to it. And no, Charles, I'm not being sensitive. I'm being honest. You mocked the woman who held your family together when it was falling apart. The woman who gave when you had nothing. If you can't show respect for her, then you'll never respect me. The silence that followed was loud. Beatrice looked away, jaw clenched, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. I came here ready to build a future, I said. Instead, I got clarity. I took one final breath. My shoulders relaxed, my fists unclenched. There won't be a wedding, I said calmly. Not now. Not ever. Behind me, someone let out a soft gasp. Another clinked their glass nervously, pretending to drink. Samantha sobbed quietly, her knees buckling as she sank into her chair. A couple of her relatives whispered to each other, trying not to stare. But everyone heard me. Everyone understood. I nodded once, not as an apology, but a full stop. Then I turned and walked out of that banquet hall for the last time. This wasn't retreat. It was release. I was no longer clinging to a future that demanded I erase my past. Out in the night air again, I let the cold settle over me, like armor. I'd broken the silence. I'd spoken the truth. Now, I was free. I didn't sleep that night. The silence in my apartment was deafening, but I welcomed it. It was honest. No violins playing over forced laughter. No backhanded compliments wrapped in designer perfume. Just the hum of the fridge, the occasional creak of the wood floor, and the weight of a decision I didn't regret. My phone buzzed constantly. Messages piling up like hail against a windshield. Samantha. Please, just call me. I need to explain. Beatrice. You embarrassed our family. I hope you're satisfied. Charles. Grow up. We were joking. If you can't handle that, maybe you're not husband material. Samantha. Again. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to laugh. I didn't know what to say. I stared at the screen, letting the messages come, without opening any of them. There was nothing in those words that could undo what had happened. Nothing that could rewrite the ache in my chest. I powered the phone off. The next morning, a knock broke through the quiet. I ignored it at first. Figured it was a neighbor or maybe a delivery I hadn't ordered. But then it came again, 3 soft knocks, then a pause. Then again. I opened the door. Samantha stood there, hair still curled from the night before, but frizzy now, like she'd slept in it. Her eyes were swollen makeup smeared around the edges. She was wearing one of my sweatshirts, one I didn't even realize had gone missing, and she clutched the sleeves like they were life rafts. Marcus, she whispered, eyes full of tears. I said nothing, just stepped back enough for her to walk in or walk away. She took it as an invitation. Inside, she turned to face me, her arms trembling at her sides. I'm sorry, she said immediately. I didn't know they were going to say all that. I swear I didn't. I folded my arms. But you didn't stop them either. Her mouth opened, then closed. I was stunned. I didn't know how to respond. They always talk like that, you know that. I didn't think they'd take it that far. And when they did, I asked. You laughed. I didn't mean it like that, she pleaded, voice cracking. It was nerves. I didn't think, I just didn't want to make it worse. Worse for who I asked. For them. She stepped forward, reaching for my hand. I love you, Marcus. I messed up, but I can fix this. We can still. I pulled my hand back. No, I said firmly. You don't get to sweep this under the rug. Not this time. Her chin quivered. Please, just talk to me. I looked at her, really looked. The woman I had planned to spend the rest of my life with. The one I defended in arguments, compromised for, trusted completely. And yet, she hadn't defended me. You know what last night really showed me? I asked quietly. She blinked at me, shaking her head slightly. It showed me who you really are, I said. And I can't unknow that. Marcus, no, I said, cutting her off. You didn't just fail to speak up. You sided with them. Maybe not with your words, but with your silence, with your smile. With every second you let them drag my mother's memory through the mud and said nothing. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks now. I was scared, she whispered. Scared of upsetting them, of causing a scene. I didn't know how to protect both sides. You weren't supposed to protect both, I said. You were supposed to protect us. You were supposed to stand beside me. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a crumpled tissue, dabbing her eyes. I didn't know what to do. I know, I said. And that's exactly the problem. She looked at me then, with such desperation that for a second I felt it, the flicker of old love, the pull of shared memories. But it didn't last. Her apology felt too late, too practiced, like it had been rehearsed in the mirror during the car ride over. It wasn't for me. It was for redemption. Is there anything I can say? She asked, barely audible. I shook my head. Not anymore. Silence stretched between us like an ocean. She looked at the floor, shoulders shaking, and then finally turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "I never meant to hurt you." I didn't answer. I simply closed the door behind her. For a long moment, I just stood there. It wasn't the end I'd imagined, but it was the one I needed. 3 days passed. The chaos had quieted, at least on the outside. No more knocks on the door. No new texts. No calls from mutual friends trying to play mediator. But inside me, the ache still simmered. Not just for what was lost, but for what had been revealed. I spent the morning cleaning something to keep my hands busy, while my mind unraveled threads I didn't want to follow. Dusting shelves, folding old linens, wiping down picture frames. I opened the cedar box that held the few things I had left of Mom. Letters in her neat cursive. A pressed flower from our last spring walk together. A brooch she wore every Sunday. And beneath it all, where it had always been, should have been the locket. But it wasn't. I stopped breathing. I pulled everything out carefully, searching every corner, every crease in the velvet lining. My pulse quickened. I checked the drawer, where I stored the box, the nearby table, the floor around it. Nothing. The locket was gone. I stood there frozen, the air thick and heavy. It wasn't just a missing item. That locket had been in our family for generations, passed down from mother to daughter. And then when Mom knew, she wouldn't live to pass it down again. She gave it to me. "You'll know when it's right," she said, pressing it into my hand. "It carries more than memories. It carries trust." And now it was gone. I sat down, heart thudding, trying to retrace every step. Only one person had been in the apartment since I last opened that box. Samantha. She'd been here the morning after the rehearsal dinner. She'd worn one of my sweatshirts, wandered the place like it still belonged to her. She'd asked to use the bathroom. She'd lingered in the bedroom under the pretense of grabbing something she left behind. And now the locket was missing. I didn't want to believe it, but the pit in my stomach told me I already did. I grabbed my phone and texted her. "Did you take the locket from Mom's keepsake box?" The reply came faster than I expected. "What are you talking about?" I gritted my teeth. "Don't lie to me, Samantha. The locket is gone. You're the only one who's been here." 3 dots hovered on the screen. Then I borrowed it. "I just wanted something to feel closer to you." I didn't think you'd notice. A hot rush of rage surged through me. Borrowed. That locket wasn't a trinket. It wasn't hers to borrow. It was sacred. I called her. She answered on the first ring. "Marcus." "Where is it?" I snapped. There was a pause. "It's at my parents' place." I didn't want to lose it. I was going to give it back. "You had no right," I said. "That belonged to my mother." "You don't take something like that. You ask. You respect it." "But you," my voice cracked, "you treated it like a prop." "I didn't mean to upset you. Too late." I hung up. 20 minutes later, I stood on the Langstons' manicured porch, the locket's absence burning a hole in my chest. Beatrice opened the door, surprise flashing across her face before settling into distaste. "Marcus." "What a surprise. Where is it?" I said flatly. She blinked. "Where is what?" "The locket. Samantha took it. She said it's here." Her lips thinned. "Well, if she did, I'm sure it was only because she missed you. She's been—" "Get her," I interrupted. A minute later, Samantha came down the stairs, her face, pale hair pulled back like she hadn't slept since our last talk. In her hand, dangling on its delicate chain, was the locket. "Here," she said quietly, holding it out. I snatched it, checking the engraving, the clasp, the worn gold surface. It was Mom's, still warm from her grip and yet colder than I'd ever known it. "I just wanted a piece of her," she whispered. "I wanted something to hold on to." "You had me," I said, "and you let them tear me apart." Beatrice crossed her arms behind her, watching like I was the rude one. I turned to leave. "Marcus," Samantha called softly. I stopped at the doorway, not turning back. "Please don't hate me," she said. I glanced over my shoulder. "I don't hate you, Sam, but I don't know you either. And I won't spend the rest of my life trying to explain who my mother was to someone who never cared to find out." Then I stepped outside, pulled the door shut behind me, and this time I slammed it. I didn't look back once. The door slammed behind me, echoing like a gavel in my mind. The cold air bit at my face as I walked down the Langston's stone steps, the weight of Evelyn's locket in my pocket grounding me with every step. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry anymore. It was everything that mattered, everything that survived. By the time I reached my car, my hands were steady, my mind clear. The next day, I blocked Samantha's number, then her mother's, then Charles's, then every cousin, aunt, mutual friend who had texted something like, "I'm sure they didn't mean it like that," or "Can't you just let it go?" I couldn't. I wouldn't. It wasn't about holding a grudge. It was about preserving the truth. I deleted the messages one by one, letting the silence replace them. The noise of guilt, denial, and manipulation faded with each swipe of my thumb. And with every contact erased, I felt lighter. I spent that afternoon at home, no TV, no music, just the still hum of my apartment and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. I pulled out the cedar box again, opened it slowly, and placed the locket back in its place. But I didn't close the lid. I picked it up again, letting the chain dangle through my fingers. The gold had dulled with age, the small, heart-shaped clasp scratched in places, but it had never looked more beautiful. I could see her, Evelyn, standing at the kitchen sink, hands wet with dish soap, humming some old gospel tune. Her laughter during Sunday dinners, the way she always tucked a blanket around my shoulders when I fell asleep on the couch. I could hear her voice in my head as clear as if she were still sitting across the table. "You don't let people rewrite your truth, baby. You live it, out loud, even when it shakes the room." She never raised her voice. She never needed to. And I finally understood that silence isn't strength unless it's chosen. But silence, forced by fear, that's surrender. And I hadn't surrendered. I'd won. Not in the way the world defines it. Not with applause or trophies or headlines. But in the way that matters most, in the mirror, in the soul, in the echo of your mother's voice, when you choose to honor her instead of shrink in shame. I didn't just cancel a wedding. I reclaimed my dignity. I reclaimed my peace. I made a pot of coffee and sat by the window, watching the winter sun cast a soft glow across the buildings outside. The city moved on unbothered by my personal war, and that was okay. The world didn't need to pause. I did. For the first time in months, I breathed without a weight on my chest. There was no pressure to please anyone. No upcoming vows to rehearse. No forced conversations with people who looked down their noses at me. Just me, the scent of coffee, and a locket that meant more than any diamond ever could. The quiet wasn't lonely. It was sacred. I thought back to the night I first met Samantha. Her laugh, the way she looked over her shoulder at me as she walked away from the bar, confident, effortless. Back then, I saw a future in her eyes. But I hadn't known the price of that future. I hadn't known how much I'd be expected to fold myself down into something smaller, something quieter. She wanted someone who would fit in. I needed someone who would stand beside me. And there's the difference. The locket rested in my palm, now warm from my skin. I clutched it gently and whispered, "I got it back, Mom. I got all of it back." And I had. My voice, my pride, my place. Some people go their whole lives shrinking to be loved. I'd almost joined them, but not anymore. I didn't need a wedding to feel whole. I didn't need validation from a family that saw generosity as meddling and humility as weakness. All I needed was to live in a way that made Evelyn proud. And I was finally doing that. With nothing left to prove and no one left to appease, I picked up my coat and stepped outside. The air was still cold, but this time, it didn't bite. It braced me like Evelyn's arms once did. The past few days had shaken everything loose, but what remained was solid, real freedom. I realized didn't always look like starting over. Sometimes it looked like letting go, and finally, I had.